So good, so good, so good.
Ready to rack to school and save big? Get to your Nordstrom Rack store today for thousands of deals from just $20.
Because I want to look fresh.
How did I not know Rack has Adidas?
I got a new backpack.
Score everyone's favorite denim, sneakers, boots, and activewear from Nike, Levi's, Steve Madden, Madewell, and Free People. Great brands, great prices. Everyone's got a reason to rack. Shop Nordstrom Rack and make it the best school year ever.
This episode is brought to you by the world's first reposado from Tequila Herradura. Made with slow-cooked, hand-harvested agave sealed into oak barrels and aged 11 months. Before being enjoyed in your glass. Experience the world's first reposado, Tequila Herradura. Please drink responsibly. Responsibility.org. Tequila Herradura. 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Brown-Forman, Louisville, Kentucky. Herradura is a registered trademark. Copyright 2025 Brown-Forman Corporation.
Ready to level up your Tudor history game? Then don't miss Forging a Queen, Catherine of Aragon Before England. This 6-week online course dives into the fearless life of young Catherine before the crown, before the heartbreak. Led by Dr. Emma, who basically lived in the Spanish archives for a decade and a half, this is not your typical history class. Early bird tickets are open now, and you get a bonus class if you grab yours by August 6th. Let's go forge a queen. Visit the show notes to sign up.
This is the Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond podcast. History with a twist. And now your host, Rebecca Larson.
Hello and welcome back to the Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson, and today I have two guests with me. Welcoming back again for the second time in 2 weeks, Dr. Peter Stiffell. Welcome back, Peter.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I know, it's weird. 2 times already. It's crazy.
We can't get enough of each other these days, can we?
No, definitely not. You know, people might start talking.
And Peter and I are welcoming a special guest today. We have Gregory Edmund, who is the head of the coin department at Spink Auction House. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me on, Rebecca.
This is a conversation that I was probably say the closest I've had to it is conversations with Peter, right?
Yeah.
So before we get too into it, Gregory, I want you to explain to the listeners, because it is something different. I've never really had an auction house on before. So what does it mean to be head of the coin department?
In its simplest terms, it's about connecting collectors, investors, buyers with sellers. You can think of the art world and you can think, how is it that something that is in a private collection can pass from one set of hands to another? But that also means that private collector can be an institution or someone representing an institution. And so in many instances, I know in America, it's very popular to privately collect and then donate to a museum. Or found your own museum, like the Getty Institute is a famous example, and the Met Museum in New York as well accepts a lot of private donations. So my work entails predominantly numismatics or the study of coins, whether that be from ancient Rome, whether that be from continental America, pre and post independence, but typically it relates to historic Britain, whether that's the Tudor period, whether that's the Iron Age period pre-Roman, or whether that's very modern coins that are only just being produced by the National Mint in Wales. And so in a short answer, it's connecting passionate collectors with passionate buyers. That's the short answer, really.
Yeah. How do you get into something like this? Is this something, have you always been fascinated by coins?
I suppose for me, coins very quickly became the windows and the portals into the past. I have always been interested in history. I have an older brother who was very passionate about military history because our grandfather served during the Second World War, and we grew up with war stories, like a lot of people will remember. And I remember him having first choice, and so he chose military history. He chose the 20th century, and he basically said to me in no uncertain terms, "You do something else. This is my patch." And so for me, it was very quickly as I was going through my high school, my secondary school here in the UK. I was very fortunate to have two very passionate tutors, one in the classical world, the Romans and the Greeks, and one in the modern history world who taught me medieval history onto the Second World War. And they saw my interest in it and they thought, how can we encourage this 10, 12, 13-year-old into history in a way that's tactile? Because for me, I love being able to hold the objects that I see and appreciate them in the flesh. And coins quickly became sort of that portal because, you know, whether you use eBay, whether you use online shopping sites, or whether you go to a local coin dealer, you can just sort of feel them, you can handle them. And for us here in the UK, many sort of generations of the same family hand down coins. So when we went decimal in the 1970s with our currency, a lot of the old coins just fell out of circulation. But my parents' generation and their parents' generation withheld a lot of the coins from that period. So it was not uncommon for people to find 1860s era Victorian pennies in their circulation for their bus change in the 1960s. And so that's how a lot of people get started. But for me, I was just captivated by the idea of how on earth can I hold something 150 years old? It'd be worth very, very little on an economic level, but actually for me really fascinates me at the idea of who's held this, who's used it, where's it been spent, where's it been valued, and how can I connect that with the figures on them. And of course in Britain we're very fortunate in the sense that we have this continuous thread of the royal family going back to the Norman conquest at the very least, where we can connect the stories with individuals. And when you have a currency that has a living individual on it, it almost it resonates in a way for Brits, certainly royal fans, about connecting with that story. And so from that, it rapidly develops into, okay, it goes from the Victorian period, which is really cool, 150 years ago, to a position where you're now interested in the Tudors, the Stuarts, the medieval period. And you start really, and when you feel and hold coins that may only be worth $20, $30, $40, but are actually 700, 800, 900 years old, it starts to become really quite difficult to quantify, but it feels magical. And you almost feel like the weight of the coin is nowhere near what the value of it is for you appreciating it. And I suppose that's really where it developed. And in the last 10 years, I've been very fortunate to work for a name that is so familiar here domestically, but is something that is familiar to American viewers because we have an office in New York, but also for our colleagues over in Hong Kong. So it's a name that has sort of developed a legacy over several hundred years itself to be this name to do with coins. And so for me, I was very fortunate straight out of university to immediately jump into a career that is absolutely connected with that and connects with my passion that I've developed over decades now.
Okay, now here's the big question. Do you collect coins yourself?
Oh, absolutely I do. Obviously, there's the conflict of interest. As an auctioneer, when I stand in the rostrum, I can't be buying the things that I'm selling. And so you have to remove yourself from that process for it to be a fair combat. But it would be false to say that I didn't get into this career by not collecting myself, by not having that passion. And so I remember when I first started here, obviously I deliberately drew a line in the sand and I said, I'm not going to actively collect, but I still have things from my childhood that I collected because I was just so in awe of the ability to privately own these things. And the big question mark that always comes up and certainly captures people's imagination when they go to the British Museum, which is only around the corner from our offices here in London, is how is it possible to own something so old? Why aren't there all these things in museums? And so for me, I was collecting things that were $20, $30, $40. And commercially, they're probably still the same value now. But I love them because I have emotions and stories that I connect with those moments because they relate to my life and what's happened in my life. But it's also about being able to say, I'm connected with my ancestors in a way that, few other objects and even paintings to an extent don't have. And so, yes, I've collected things, whether it's things that come from circulation, which is how a lot of people get started now and how a lot of mints are trying to get people engaged in coin collecting, particularly as we transition to contactless payments, cryptocurrencies, that sort of world. The actual ability to physically hold money and to appreciate and value it in a sense, we are very, very passionate about sharing. But I don't think you can get into this world unless you physically have collected yourself. I don't think it's something you can just sort of pass by. You could admire, but you can't actually really appreciate until you actually start collecting yourself, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the big question then. Peter, I'm going to go to you next here. Obviously, we know your history with Mary the First, and we've talked about the coins and medals with her before. But how did you connect with Gregory?
Yeah, well, I was trying to remember actually. I think Greg got in contact with me. Now, I don't know where he found me. You know, who knows? But yeah, I mean, I just want to echo what he said about, when it comes to coins, there's something, we always read the history books, we watch TV shows and documentaries about these things, and even if we look at the paintings of these figures, but to actually hold something that is from that period, I mean, I can't explain the feelings you get with that. You're actually holding something that, who knows how many transactions it's gone through, and who's held it. How did they see this particular coin? Especially when it comes to Merish coins, you think, oh, it's just so cool. But it's more than that. It's actually got a spiritual connection with the past. So yeah, I mean, Greg, how did we get to know each other? I can't remember now.
So I'm very untypical for someone of my age range in the 20 to 30 bracket. I very much developed my Instagram and my social media to be very work focused. And I think it was probably a case of I posted a coin of Queen Mary, and the wonders of the algorithms of this day and age had obviously propelled it in poor Peter's direction. And then earlier this year, when I knew that I was consigning a really important collection of Marian coinage, which includes some of her rarest issues, both on her own, but also jointly with Philip, that I thought what I really want to do, and what I'm really passionate about within my role at Spink, is to connect with academics that do this for their job. They do this for a living. And there is no way that I can personally attempt to get to know what Peter has been able to achieve by doing his PhD. So for me, it's very easy to go the Route 1 method and basically, quite literally, the Hail Mary, just approach someone like Peter and say, Peter, can you write about these coins? Because we have a past experience when we sold a magnificent 13th century gold penny of King Henry III, the chap who basically ratified Magna Carta and is the story behind your American political system in a sense, and how, the start of the House of Parliament. But one of these crazy attempts that he had in the mid 1250s was to produce a gold coinage in a kingdom that had no gold. And it lasted all of 3 months. But what I did as part of the process in this discovery being dug up by a metal detectorist was communicate with a professor, David Carpenter at King's College London. And he has written book after book after book on Henry III. I don't know anyone on the planet better capable of communicating what this coin means than someone who's studied him for his entire life. And so for me, what I've learned from that scenario is it's so much more beneficial to connect the academic world that does this as their bread and butter with the collector's world that for some reason hasn't previously engaged, that pool and wealth of talent in order to bring them together so that the people that are really passionate about it comes through in the words and prose that they provide us, but it also gives them an opportunity to really study their subject matter. And so that's really how we met. It was a social media connection through the beauty of algorithms. But it's wonderful because it's meant that Peter and I can share ideas and thoughts about a subject matter that most people our age may not care about, but actually there'll be other people out there who might not have seen this. And so by seeing it through podcasts, through Instagram, whatever it may be, or through the auction world itself, we're actually sharing that passion. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah. So is Peter working with you right now on these coins?
He certainly has been, yeah. And the beautiful thing is, although because he was in London on Monday, the coins hadn't yet arrived from overseas. They have since arrived, but Peter has done some sterling work in writing up the catalogue descriptions of these and giving a context to them. Because the one thing that's problematic with coins is they are inert bits of metal. They don't have quite the same personality as a painting, and so you have to imbue and embody that personality into it. And so when we talk about the Tudor period, of course, there are so many romantic mental images we have of the key protagonists in that, whether that's the chancellors, whether that's the sovereigns themselves, we can immediately see that. But it's weird that there's always this disconnect between the imagery that's used on the coinage and the imagery we have when we think about these people. And so for me, the key is uniting those two forces. Yes, using the interplay of what people already associate with these monarchs, but also doing so in a way that says, okay, for the coin collector, let's associate that with the period that it actually comes from. And for the art collector, let's associate coins with your world. And so it's a two-way street. And so, what Peter has contributed is magnificent because it's given life to the person who's designed the artwork for the coins, the person who was responsible for producing the coins and how much money and bullion they needed for it. It's those little things that you would expect the auction world to, do automatically, which it hasn't done before, means that people see it in a fresh light. And the kind of collector that is now engaging is a much broader audience, which is ultimately for everyone's benefit.
Yeah, I guess I didn't even know until being introduced to you and your website that you could buy coins online.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's so amusing. I mean, there are coin dealers in London that survive purely on the process of you can actually own this, you can own this privately. And I suppose that's the romance about coin collecting ultimately. It's, it's a much more portable, physically and literally, store of wealth, but enjoyment of a hobby than having a whole run of books, potentially where you need a library in, more minimalist homes now. Or if you don't have the funds to go and buy, a multi-million-dollar oil painting, you can connect with those people on a much more minimalist budget. And yes, coins can become very, very expensive very, very quickly. But for people that actually love it and have, a strict budget, they can do so and really enjoy the things they're connecting with, because the wonders of some coins is they can be much more common survivors than others. And of course, in the UK, we're blessed with thousands of years of history. There are hobbyists going out every day now metal detecting, and they're finding new examples. And I'm contacted almost weekly about a new Queen Mary silver groat that's been found, or a half groat, or something that's unusually rare for her reign. Suddenly, has now been brought back to life and knowledge, which is great.
Yeah. So I know you said the coins just arrived. So Peter, have you only seen pictures of them so far?
I've just seen pictures of them because they hadn't turned up Monday, so we're definitely going to arrange another visit. But Rebecca, honestly, they're beautiful. They really.
Well, tell me a little bit about your experience seeing these, Peter, because we know that you are the Mary Coin guy. That's what I'm going to call you. You are the Mary Coin guy. So when you were looking at these, did you see anything you haven't seen before?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I've seen like the pictures of the coins before, but to actually look at like the gold angels and like the gold sovereigns, it always surprises me how thin they were actually, because we're quite used to sort of thick sovereigns in modern currency. But yeah, I mean, and just the survival of them and how clean they are actually, because it's gold, it doesn't tarnish. It's like they were done yesterday. They're really fantastic, and I obviously have my own little collection, which I started during the pandemic. More because I was curious, and two, I sort of, well, why do all these museums need to have them? Why don't I just start my own one? Because it's, like I said, holding history, and like Greg said, I mean, Mary groats they're everywhere at the minute. Everyone seems to be wanting them, which is it's fascinating. It really is, and I mean, I saw a beautiful Mary coin on Monday, which I'd never seen in the flesh, and it's so surprising how small they are. And even after 500 years, the detail in them it's just, they're beautiful. They really are. But I'll let Greg go and talk to you about the actual coins because he's like the expert.
Oh, too kind, Peter, too kind. I mean, it for me, this will be a career highlight because it is so rare to be able to have one private collection that has every rarity within the Marian and the Philip and Marian period in one group. So to put it in context, Queen Mary's coinage obviously was only issued for 5 years, from 1553 until her death in 1558. The first year of her reign is obviously her sole reign issues, and then when she merges with Philip, we get this wonderful convergence of styles in which you have these tete-a-tete portraits of Philip facing Mary on shillings and some very rare half crowns. But what is purely seen on her coinage, whether it is for her sole reign or her joint reign, she is the only representative form on her gold coinage. That preserve is left with her as the Queen sua jure. It is her right. And what is fantastic is she introduces, or rather reintroduces, the gold rial, which is this 15 shilling, really unusual coin, in which depicts the flamboyance and the virginity of her obviously as an unmarried queen at the time, standing in a Tudor galleon, something that you probably wouldn't associate with her on a visual level. But here she is, rambunctious at her absolute sort of swagger best, in her, fighting for the English kingdom, or queendom as then was, in a Tudor galleon. It's a magnificent image, and it's such a rare thing to survive from her reign, because they were generally struck to be commercial vehicles for certain economic transactions that happened overseas, and a lot of the rials that we see are Elizabethan, and they relate to the 1580s. So to have an example struck by Mary in her reign for the 1550s is very, very rare. But alongside that, you also have the touch pieces, which are this ancient practice of the queen or king, sovereign in post, of course being the right hand of God, and from that having the mystical belief that they would be able to touch for the king's or queen's sickness, which is scrofula as we know it today, which is these pustules, boils, that sort of thing, rather unsightly looking things that any medieval Tudor man or woman could get simply by being undernourished. There was this belief that if you had this touching from the queen or the king, that you would be cured, because they are the God's anointed representative on earth. And so it developed from the washing of the feet that you get with the disciples and Jesus to this position of this annual rite of, subjects coming to the queen and being touched in order to be cured, to a position where they are gifted a memento of that. And that came in the form of the gold angel. And typically these appear to be used as touch pieces, so that you can't respend them. But in this particular case, they aren't pierced because they obviously performed a more economic function. But what you're dealing with there is a really religiously charged image. It has St. Michael the Archangel vanquishing the dragon. It's a really symbolic message that exists in pre-Tudor England, but is a very sort of God-fearing image, which says, remember who you are, remember your place on earth, whether you're the monarch or whether you're an individual receiving this from the monarch. And so to be able to have not only examples from her sole reign, but joint reign is rare, but what is especially rare to have alongside the royal is the diminutive forms, the half angels, which are, in a strange sort of sense, it'll be like, instead of having the dollar bill having the Kennedy $half, it's having the unusual fractional element that is incredibly rare, because, as Peter was saying, the practical implications of producing these coins, there is no mechanization. You're not using a screw press, you're not using a modern machine to produce these. These are all handmade. So every single coin is unique in that sense, because someone has had to whack these out at the Tower of London in Mint Street, which you can visit today if you come to London. And so each coin that is produced is unique, but of course it takes as much effort to produce a small fractional coin as it does the big chunky gold bright coins. And so in a weird sense and counterintuitively, our excitement is enriched by the fact that we've got these fractions, which are outside of museums. There are, in some cases, this is the only example known. And as a result, these are coins that have a second life provenance, a pedigree, like with the art world, where we can trace exactly where this coin has been, not just today, but where it was in the great collections of 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And so as a result, we know that we're handling the absolute top of the tree when it comes to quality and rarity. And as I say, to have that all in one private collection is magnificent, absolutely magnificent. And so as an event, for me as an auctioneer, as you can probably tell in my passion for it, this is a once in a career event. But to be able to do it with people like Peter, who are genuinely passionate about it and can add so much more than I could ever do in a 3 or 6 month auction cycle, is what makes it truly special, because it means that we only get one shot at selling these items. Let's make it count. Let's make every bit of research that we can put and bring to bear on this coin available for the buyer at the time. Because if it then goes and sets a world record, fantastic. That means there's more engagement, newspapers, the media picks up on that story, and then we spread the message even wider about Mary. And that I think is the fundamental to what we do. And that's what makes it so special.
So just out of curiosity, are these sold in a batch or individually?
I mean, it would be almost sacrilegious to say that we were selling them as one batch, although I'm sure if Peter could buy it in one person, I'm sure he would. I would too. But no, I mean, in this particular case, when you're dealing with a modern collector, you have to play to their standards. So when we think about the Victorian collector, our age, pre-1900, it was very much a completist charter. In order to show that you were a true numismatist, a true specialist, a true comprehender of the world around you in the age of empires, you had to have a sample of every single coin that was produced, of every date and every type. Nowadays, people don't do that. The collector is very much charged by what is the trophy item, what is the totem pole of the collecting tree. And so as a result, there are going to be people that are absolutely fascinated and unable to let go of the Mary Ryle, who will have no interest in a Mary Half Angel, even though the rarity is commensurate with one another. So as a result, there'll be specialists that will collect certain types, and they'll be wanting the Half Angel from every reign, including the one that from Mary that's been missing for so long. But there will also be collectors that just want a representative example. And so we haven't mentioned it, but the full sovereign of Queen Mary is a truly magnificent image that she's produced. She popularised what Queen Elizabeth later stole, in a sense. The imagery that is and the legends that are used on the coins. 118th Psalm, which we associate with Queen Elizabeth learning on the discovery that she was becoming queen at Hatfield House in 1558. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvellous in our eyes, is actually the psalm that is used on Mary's coinage beforehand, but she just co-opts it and uses it further on. And so, in a sense, Mary was the trendsetter. And so all of the things we see her achieve, whether it's the use of dates on coins, that's something that starts with Edward VI, her half-brother, but she really makes it and pushes it into a popular sphere that is then co-opted going forward. So she starts simple things like dates on coins. She really brings back a lot of the traditional Catholic rites, some things that a lot of England would have been used to up until 1536, the dissolution of the monarchies, and then the next chaotic 10-15 years. She brings a lot of that back. So in a similar sort of way that you could align it with the political schisms of today, it will be like remembering the time of Barack Obama versus the current presidency. It's that sort of how much has changed in that time, but how much has stayed the same. And you see that with her coins really, really powerfully. She chooses to produce coins that are familiar to those that might be slightly older, because one of her staple coins during her sole reign is the groat, the 4-penny coin. Now, this is the workhorse of its day. It's your average daily wage for most workers. She chooses to produce that, it having lapsed under Edward VI. So for her, she's taken it a step back. But she also, when she's in her joint reign with her consort Philip, she chooses to strike coins that are going to be useful economically overseas. So she's trying to open up borders to the continent, to Spain, the new association there. And so it's a very clever practice that she's done. Economically speaking, she's tried to play both to the domestic camp and to the international camp. And I have no doubt, and I'm sure Peter would agree, that had she had a longer life and didn't have the medical frailties that she did have, that I'm sure that she would have been able to re-establish a lot of what Elizabeth I has actually subsequently benefited from, because she set a lot of the standards that Elizabeth subsequently popularised and effectively took the credit for.
Peter, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, just exactly what Greg said. We had to remember, one of Mary's first acts was to sort out the coinage. It's just, like I said previously, it takes a long time for these policies to actually cement themselves. And obviously Elizabeth takes the credit for them. But, I just want to go back to that Half Angel, because I didn't know that existed, because we've never seen one before. And the fact that this one's now come up, it's remarkable. And, it's quite an honour to be part of this process where we've rediscovered this ancient coin which no one knew about, or no one's ever seen one, let's put it that way. So it makes you wonder, what else is out there that we've just not seen before, because it's in someone's private collection somewhere. It's a remarkable achievement. It really is.
I feel like Peter is going to be fighting pretty hard for this one at auction.
Yeah. So I've already asked and I can't have it.
But payment terms of 15 to 25 years or something like that.
Yeah. I just think this is it's a fascinating subject. And obviously when it comes to Tudor coins, that's really interesting too. I didn't know that Edward VI was the first to put a year on the coin.
Yeah, I mean, so this is something that is almost, it's so blindingly obvious that you don't really equate it in time zones. But prior to the introduction of Arabic numerals, as we would recognise in 1551, which he puts on his third coinage, his last coinage, there is the use of the Roman numeral system occasionally on some of his larger denominations. But prior to that point, the way that they dated coins, or rather showed the sequencing between chief engravers or heads of mint facilities and treasurers that would be answerable to the crown if the coinage was found to be deficient in standard, was ultimately with what are known as Pix marks, little trial marks that can be quite fun, curious little symbols that are used on the coins to basically date them. And of course, when we look at the study of medieval coinage, we have to use these mint marks in order to establish the chronology. And obviously hoards help us because we can tell before and after which ones are in use. And in sometimes interpreting medieval Latin is incredibly difficult for mint records that may or may not survive. And of course, in the case of Henry VIII, who is the one king that debases the coinage, you've heard of the pound sterling. A lot of people don't realise that the sterling part of that comes from the fact that it's sterling silver, and that's something that was established by the Anglo-Saxons pre-1066, and it was still in use and still protected by every monarch until Henry VIII debased it, because what he wanted to do was pay himself all of the overspending he'd done on all of his palaces from the 1520s. And so when Edward VI comes in, he has a real problem, which is how do you deal with an official currency that has been severely damaged by your father? So you're now in a position of hyperinflation, an economic decline. The world knows that you should have a good standard of coinage, but you can't suddenly just start injecting great coins back into circulation because people are just going to hoard them. And so what do? You have to be innovative, and you start putting dates on them, because what you want to do is be able to track what is the circulation life of these coins, how are they surviving in circulation, because coins need to practically be useful. There's no good having blank discs circulating. But you also want to make sure that the people that are entrusted to produce that coinage of your likeness, share your message, your propaganda to your subjects, is done so in a way that doesn't mean that they're also debasing the coinage, which has been a problem throughout history. If you're in charge of the hen house, sometimes you steal a few chickens. That's what happens with moneyers. And so all of these things are done to fight both the internal problems, but the external problems that are caused at the onset of Edward's reign. And he doesn't manage to achieve it in his short life. And Mary, of course, establishes a lot of what is then taken credit for by Elizabeth. But yeah, it's fun that even such obvious things like dates on coins come around as a result of trying to combat inflationary economic debasement, decline, and the simple problem of can you trust the people actually producing the coins.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love, starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
There's so much more that goes into history than you would never sit back. When you first start studying the Tudors, you'd never sit back and go, I think I'm going to start studying coins because I'm going to learn a lot more about the history of this monarchy if I study. I never would have thought that. But after listening to you today, you've just opened up this whole world to me that I'm sure Peter has already been diving into. But it's amazing.
It's all about the little people, isn't it? The little people that no one really pays much attention to. Yeah. They're all part of that mechanism, which is the crown. And it's just fascinating. When you start reading the documents, and they're paid £20-30 a year. Some of these people, so it's quite a lot. So it just shows how responsible, what their responsibility was really, and how important it is. Because, like I've said on previous episodes, coins are the only image some people are ever going to see of their monarch. So it has to be done right, and it has to be in a way that's accessible to them.
Yeah. And it does seem like we've talked about this before, Peter, that Elizabeth really steals the thunder from her sister on a lot of this stuff, doesn't she?
Yep. Yeah, you know my feelings.
I mean, and as they are wonderful pieces of social engineering, and they are the windows that we don't often get to the past, because when we're thinking about the Tudor period, we're obviously coming from a position of being literate, being able to read, and a lot of the practical implications that come out through this period are you clearly see a society that is not particularly literate, but could obviously hear from those that were, whether they were parish priests or that sort of nature, communicating and converting what they see. But sometimes during the reign of Elizabeth, you see the implementation of pellets and roses as alternating symbols for people to be able to understand the complexity of the coinage they're using, because they had to be able to trust the intrinsic value of the coin, because that's what backed the value of the thing you were using. But clearly also you couldn't necessarily read, so you could feel almost like Braille, oh, this has 2 pellets on it, that's worth 2 pence. So they did sort of practical things like that. But coins also give us this wonderful contemporary witness that few other accounts do of what was the religious fervour, the religious feeling. And so there are so many examples of coins being defaced because, the Calvinist of Edward VI or the Protestant vilification of Elizabeth of Mary. You see the portraits being deliberately rubbed out by people that clearly have issue and umbrage with the people in charge. And so, of course, you can read texts and manuscripts and you can hear through a particular person's lens. But until you actually physically hold these objects, which for the original person may just have been an inert bit of metal paying them their daily wage, but for other people might have been the one time you could actually show who you really felt, what you really felt about your monarch. Really, really powerful. And for me, that always resonates. And it feels like it embodies so much more than just being a blank or pseudo-blank metal disc with a few details on it.
Yeah. Okay, this is, I don't know if you've watched or listened to the show before, but I sidetrack quite often because it's just how my mind works. And you were talking about defacing coin, and it made me think of the Anne Boleyn Most Happy medal. Are you familiar with it, Gregory?
I am indeed, yeah. And what on the subject of Anne Boleyn, what's almost amusing to me is when we look at the whole reign of Henry VIII, obviously we get this impression that every time he slips up and makes mistakes and changes the consort, that there's this what I would term damnatio memoriae, the absolute removal of all of the memories of that person. But one of the few witnesses that plays that out is on the coinage. And so Henry, in order to establish, the lineage by which the bloodline is going to descend, has coinage produced where he's married to Catherine of Aragon, his first wife. Then he has coinage produced with his second wife, Anne Boleyn. He has it produced with Jane Seymour, the beloved Jane who produced some Edward VI. And then, of course, he still doesn't learn his lesson because Anne of Cleves has coinage with her name on it, and Catherine Howard, number 5, has her cipher on it. So 5 of the 6 consorts of Henry VIII are actually on his coinage. And you start to wonder, particularly when you get these wonderful mules, which is the improper application of head and tail, that you get one monarch on one side with one consort and one monarch with a different consort mule together. You can see the practical problems that the poor people at the Tower of London had. Who is the actual queen at the moment? Let's just put whatever we can together. And so you get this, and I remember I've discussed this at length with Dr. David Starkey, one of the great minds of Tudor study. And he said, it's all about love, Gregory. It's all about love. And I just love this idea that they didn't learn their lesson. I just love that this idea, it's wise, but they kept doing the same thing and getting the same result. Brilliant.
Yeah. Well, I guess my main question when it comes to this Anne Boleyn medal for you, since you work in coins, and I would say it's probably a very similar type of an industry, but when that medal arrived at the British Museum, this is something Dr. Emma had told me, that it was not damaged when it first arrived at the British Museum, and sometime since then is when the nose was flattened or whatever. Is that what you would call it, Peter?
Yeah. And it wasn't me, I promise. It wasn't.
Yeah. So I'm curious, from your experience, what could cause something like that once it's being held in a facility? How would could something like that accidentally get damaged, or would it have to be an intentional thing?
Not having seen the before and after, I couldn't possibly cast assumptions about proper handling. Although what I would say is these are in a sense living objects. So whilst if damage has occurred, obviously that's a tragedy because this has survived in its state until the moment that you've damaged the item. But in another sense, it's part of its second life. It's the fact that where has this thing been through its life, and it's now part of the story that it could have become damaged. The possibilities are that if it's been made in a lead alloy or if it's been made in gold, these are very, very soft metals. And so even minor pressure or minor improper handling can cause damage like that. And that's obviously why we have to be so very careful. And the debate rages on ad nauseum about whether you use white gloves to hold these things. You see it on when we do Who Do You Think You Are? When you're carving through old manuscripts, do you use gloves or not? And debate rages about whether the sweat on your skin is a good thing for the manuscripts or not, or all those things come into play. I think it comes back to the simple message of how do you revere the object and how do you handle it. And if you don't think you can handle it properly, don't touch it. Leave as is. But in my case, having worked at the British Museum on a scholar programme back in 2016, I know how their objects are stored, and so for me, if it's been stored within the cabinet trays, which is how a lot of the museum collection is stored, that is not on display, I cannot foresee a scenario in which it becoming damaged that way. It may simply be in the case of if it's being moved from one exhibition to another, and there are third parties involved in that, something may have happened like that. But I'm not aware of a specific scenario like that. Obviously, it's beholden on the British Museum, being a state body in a sense and governed by Parliament's practices to make sure that it's handling items properly. It is in charge of some of the greatest treasures on planet Earth that humans have made, as well as royal gifts. It holds the private coin collection of King George III, which is fascinating, and so it should really have the specialists involved to be able to handle those properly. And it's also got the wonderful medal in gold of Giacomo di Trezzo of Mary. It has some of the greatest things that you almost get chills thinking about. Magnificent, really magnificent.
Yeah, it's quite. I wish I could remember. I don't remember when the British Museum obtained that medal, but I think it's been centuries. I don't know. Do you know more, Peter?
I think it's 19th century, isn't it?
Okay, so it's been.
I think so. I mean, that's a complete guess. I'm sure it's it's either 19th century or late 18th.
Okay.
Because the British Museum was founded in the 18th century, so
it's published by Edward Hawkins in 1885. So it's been there as long as that. And Edward Hawkins was the curator of the Department of Antiquities before Department of Coins in 1861. So he is a legend when it comes to the study. So he certainly wouldn't have been responsible for its damage. But of course, at that time as well, and this is almost the danger when it comes to coin collecting, is we're obviously dealing with genuine products, genuine articles. But for as long as there have been genuine coins, there's been forgery. And I really enjoy both the contemporary forgeries, the things that are clearly done by people that may be semi-literate or fully literate or disgruntled, having formerly worked at the mint and are now turning their hand to, go against their former employer, because those really bear witness to how people perceive the very coins that are in their pockets. And some of the things that have changed, and in the reign of Elizabeth, as I mentioned, they alternated between the rose being depicted behind the Queen, the Tudor rose, and there being no image at all behind the Queen, and that was able to differentiate between a sixpence and a fourpence. And what is wonderful is you get direct examples from the 16th century of people deliberately adding roses to groats of 4 pennies to make them into sixpences of 6 pennies. And so the fact that you have contemporary accounts of people doing this shows that they understood the complexities of the currency they're using. But again, it shows that how they actually received the coins and played around with it. And, for as long as there have been coins, there have been people trying to chance their arm. It's just human nature.
Yeah. Wow. This conversation is fascinating. I wasn't sure what to expect today, but
It's not boring.
I love anything that's old. Obviously, I'm into history, so I love antiques. I love old things. I have always been fascinated by coins my entire life, but I grew up, on a farm. I didn't get to travel very much. And so my experience with coinage really started when I worked in retail. as a young woman, and and I'm in Minnesota right now, but for a long time I lived in North Dakota, which is very close to the Canadian border. So is Minnesota. So we get a lot of Canadian coin that gets mixed in with our currency. And that kind of started it, right? All the Queen Elizabeth II coinage started collecting that, and random coins that people would try and use and would pass off. And I'd be emptying a till at the end of the night going, I don't know what country this is in, but it's pretty cool. And I'm going to swap it out because it was meant to be a nickel, and I'm going to put a nickel in, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to go see what I can figure out about. I mean, it is fascinating. Money has been around forever.
Yeah. And it's something we take for granted now, especially now that money isn't even in a physical form anymore.
Yes.
But it's something that was so intrinsic and so important to understanding, to national identity, to a sense of place, that it's always going to have a performative propaganda perspective. But of course, now we're seeing the evolution of coins to being not just functional, but artwork. And a lot of the modern productions are very much geared towards commemoration, to celebration, to almost not necessarily political rewriting of the past, but in cases it can be, with some of the most recent things. But yeah, I mean, money has a much more powerful impact than people necessarily appreciate. And if you're within an area that doesn't have money, are you more free or less free? I don't know. It's a very interesting thought to think about, because you're obviously beholden to the state that is producing that very money that you're holding and trusting that it's worth that.
I always joke that I want to get rid of money and go back to bartering, trade and barter.
Go back to 7th century BC, Asia Minor and Lydia and King Croesus. We can tell him, don't produce those coins. They're a bad idea.
Yeah, bad idea. We'll just trade things instead. Well, this has been really enlightening. And Gregory, I want you to talk about the auction. So this is all of these coins that we were just talking about today are going to be coming up in an auction. Can you go into that a little bit?
Absolutely, I can. Yes. So the auction is the Carrington collection, which is the single private collection of 130 English, Anglo-Saxon, medieval, and Tudor gold coins. They are all gold. And they represent English history, both from domestic England and also the Anglo-Gallic ruling parties of the 15th century, from the 8th century AD, around the time of Alfred the Great and a little before then, all the way through to the 16th century and the death of Elizabeth I in 1603. And they represent probably the finest collection of privately owned coins, certainly that I've seen in recent decades, but certainly it will be up there with some of the finest ever assembled in the 200-300 years of private English coin collecting that's been going on, principally because of the number of rarities that it contains, things that are outside of museums, just not held privately. So, for example, there is a Henry VII Ryle. There are 8 examples known, all of which are in public institutions, apart from this example. And so that on its own sets the tone. You have a gold penny of Henry III, which is, there are 8 examples known. 4 of them are in the British Museum. 2 others are in public institutions, one in America and one in the UK. And the other one we sold back in 2022. So again, it sets the tone for just how rare these things are. And these are things that will be going into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the jewel in the crown is definitely the Tudor period, because that was the principal focus and energy of this Carrington collector. And he has focused so intently on collecting every single consort of Henry VIII in the coinage and its reflections, which is really, really great as a storytelling point, but also focusing on the highest, biggest denomination coins that he could afford at the time. And he was spending, in the tens of thousands of pounds, hundreds of thousands of dollars, 50, 60 years ago to get these coins. So you can just imagine, even with inflation, just how high they're going to go. But this is all happening in one magnificent auction in September, 30th of September here in London. And for us, it's particularly special because we've been in business doing coin auctions at least for 200 years. But our name is traced back to at least 1666. And what's really fun is we even recently discovered doing our annual tree for our 360th anniversary next year. that we also are one of the first investors in North America because we injected £50 into the Saugus Ironworks in Massachusetts. So we are also responsible for the first coinage or the first steel dies that were producing the New England shilling of 1652. So Spink has been sort of this name associated with all of post-Enlightenment modern history, both sides of the pond. And so for us, being able to say that within our really lengthy history, we cannot find a parallel for the number of varieties of rarities that are being offered in this one sale, which will have every English monarch in gold from Henry III to King Charles III in one sale. That is unprecedented, not just for us, but globally. So to have that in one sale on one day is magnificent. And you know, for me, as a career highlight, to be able to be wielding the gavel and spending other people's money, it's fantastic. And sharing that passion for history, that's great.
It's fantastic. Okay, so if the listeners or viewers of this episode are interested in checking out this auction, how can they do that?
So very easy. You can find us on our website, www.live.spink.com, or you're very welcome to reach out to me at gedmund@spink.com. I'm very happy to engage and talk ad nauseum about coins. But yeah, pretty much just save the date in your diary, the 30th of September 2025. It is going to be something that you're probably going to catch in social media. You're probably going to see it in the newspapers and online, because it's something pretty seismic. And we're very, very proud to be bringing this to bear, and of course using the expertise of people like Peter in order to really contextualize the objects we're handling, so that the next buyer is going to share in that passion just as much as the last.
Yeah, I'm really proud that I was able to talk to you today, because this has just blown my mind. And thank you, Peter, as well, for bringing this to my attention, because I feel like we pigeonhole ourselves sometimes as podcasters and as history enthusiasts into just the books, or the paintings. And we do talk about coins and medals, but this is like a whole nother level that we were talking about today that was just so cool. This was really cool. I really enjoyed this. Gregory, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I'm glad that other people enjoy it just as much as I do.
Thanks for listening to Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you never miss a new release. And if you loved it, leave a quick review. It helps more history lovers find the show. Want to support the podcast and get bonus content? Head to patreon.com/tudorsdynasty. You can also find the link in the show notes of this episode. Join the conversation with Rebecca on social media at Tudors Dynasty. And
Juvederm Day is coming on August 20th. For one day only, buy one $75 gift card and get one free. Juvederm Day gift cards can be used on any product in the Juvederm collection of fillers. Don't miss out on this once-a-year chance to save. Join Allie now while supplies last. Skin Beef by Juvederm is excluded from this promotion. Terms and conditions apply.
till next time.